Show starts in 1 minute. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family.
Like 9 out of 10 film stars, Raquel Welch uses Lux Beauty Soap.
Well, no, I like to be a woman and a man to be a man, you know.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see. We hope you have a wonderful time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse. This week, we have a very special guest in Mr. D. Welcome on, sir.
Hello. Your introduction has made me want to slip into my my announcer voice. Be sure to pick up all your refuse when you leave this auditorium.
Exactly. Yeah. There was a lot of that in the video I used as a base, but I had to, of course, cut a lot of it away to create the, I don't know if you could call it masterpiece that we currently have.
Film assemblage art. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Leo Borealis, you're joining us as well.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to be back here again.
Yes. And for everyone listening, I'm sorry, I'm still suffering a little bit from the convention, the Witten that we went to a couple of weeks ago. I have this cough that's still lingering. It refuses to give up. So I might randomly, the coof. I got the coof. It's so if I mute at inopportune times, it's probably just because I'm coughing.
Yeah, I probably got it from Chris Gard. He was looking a little bit under the weather during the entire thing, actually. So
maybe. Monopathalmos in chat says Ludic has been arrested and executed. No, he was also feeling under the weather, and he figured it was best to take a week off from the Longhouse. Anyway,
he has succumbed.
He has succumbed, indeed. So I'm very excited to have Mr. D on. I mean, for those who don't know who this man is, he features prominently, of course, on Twitter with his artistic posts and takes in general. And he's also the co-host of Unpopular Opinions, which I don't think is a shock to anyone listening. And you also run your famous late night spaces, which, because of time zones, is my early morning. So the times I've been appearing on there, I'm usually drinking my coffee while you guys are a couple of drinks deep.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, it's early morning for us too. Just more on the night side than in the morning.
Just a different one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But no, totally disreputable conversation for no reason. I don't know why I started doing those. I remember when the Spaces feature kind of, drifted into Twitter, and I was just like, I can't be asked to have a channel, so I'll try this, and it just sort of evolved. Yeah.
I really enjoy sort of the, what's the word? The ephemeral, is that the word? The ephemeral nature of those shows. You have to be there at the moment to catch the, there's a lot of funny jokes that only get played out.
I used to record them, but I realized that was not a good idea because I'm joined by various people, and the conversation is somewhat candid at times. So
yeah. All right, so there's no way of getting around it, I think. Is there, before we start, is there anything else I've forgotten in terms of your social media? It's Twitter, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's it. I'm just some loser on on Twitter at the moment. So
fair enough. I maybe we can use this as a way into the conversation, because it's something that I've noticed, and we'll get to Slopgate. Okay, we'll get to it. I know people in the chat said this is what they want to see. They want to hear Mr. D talk about Slopgate. But at first, I think part of what sort of sparked this, and I've noticed it a bit before that, is the effects of monetization on Twitter, which has sort of cranked the hate machine, I guess, up to 11. It has really incentivized people to trigger as many people as possible, really. And I'm not sure what is to be done, really. I mean, it's a bit of a Pandora's box that has now been opened, right?
yeah, yes. I mean, of course, I think a lot of people foresaw what was going to happen when that great incentive for engagement was sort of put there. And of course, I mean, obviously, I don't begrudge people trying to scrape scrape any sort of financial remuneration from from their activities, because of course a lot of people spend far too much time fiddling around on Twitter, so it must at least make some money from it. Yeah,
at least you can make a couple of dollars.
But and of course, but Twitter is a terrible place, for the most part anyway. And
for conversation.
Always has been, at least the way most people use it. And so it can only get worse by basically saying, the more engagement that you get, then the more money you're going to make. And so of course it's going to spur people to do even more of the kind of horrible shit that they already do, and basically post things they may not even believe, or just to cause controversy and just to cause people to be angry and reply, and then reply back and I mean, obviously we've already seen this. I don't want to be untoward and accuse any of my wonderful mutuals of engaging in this behavior, but they certainly have. So basically, anyone who has the blue tick of death, the verified symbol,
right. Does the blue tick as well give you more reach? Is that a feature?
Well, it gives you reason, because of course, if you don't have it, then you're not making any money, because you can't be verified.
Fair enough.
You've got to be verified to be making money. So if you see the tick, you can always be suspicious of people's motives, and of course, almost everyone has bought it. I haven't, and I never will. I will never ever give money for that shite. Why would I do that? But as I said, I can't immediately fault people, but it's always going to be there in the back of my mind. Did they actually mean this?
Did you mean this as inflammatory as you actually wrote it, or did you hype it up for the sake of
Yeah, I mean, the discussion on Twitter has, since they rolled that out, has really been turbocharged. I mean, people have been, you can really see it, as you said, Mr. D, at points they have really been pouring gasoline on a quite small thing just to make it flare up. But I think what you said earlier, Walrus, that there were some mentionings from the muskrat himself, that if you buy the mark of the beast, then you will get automatically you will be boosted and
I was thinking there was something about reach mentioned. Yeah, at some point.
It was part of the package. They didn't specify exactly how it was going to work, but I guess it's twiddling with the algorithm.
Right. Well, and not to accuse anyone of engaging in that, but it certainly came to pass with the whole Slopgate phenomena. And part of the reason why I felt that kind of fit to have Dion is his understanding of culinary arts, of course, and maybe try to help me as a bit of a layman to understand this, because I'm a bit torn on the Slopgate stuff. I have written in my notes here, in air quotes, food metaphysics, and there was something like a week ago. I remember I've been rewatching some Seinfeld every now and then. And there's an episode, I don't remember which season it is. It's probably like season 5 or 6 or 7 or something, when Elaine starts working as a personal assistant for, what's his name?
Mr. Pitt, yes.
Mr. Pitt, yes. And Mr. Pitt has a habit of eating his Snickers bar with a knife and fork. Which then, throughout, I'm not sure if it's just the episode or if it's multiple episodes, I can't really remember, but more and more people start picking up the idea of eating, your cookie with a knife and fork. And to me, sort of the core of that joke is that there is some sort of, tier system to how we value the food, in a sense, because the Snickers bar isn't supposed to be eaten with a knife and fork. That's too much dignity for a Snickers bar, not to explain or try to like ruin the joke, right? But that's what got me thinking about that, and I remember having a friend, well, friend is a strong term. I was doing volunteer work at some point in my youth, and I got to hang out a lot with a man who was from Eritrea, which is a country in Africa. I can't remember quite. Is it on the east coast of Africa, I think? And he told me, because we talked about food at some point, and he told me that he didn't enjoy really Eritrean food because it's all just stew. It's all just one version of a stew, and you eat it with your hands. And coming to Norway was a culture shock because you had like order in your food was the words he used. And I don't want to be too quick to like judge local cuisine across the world, right? And so I guess that's the question I'm posing to you, D. Can you help me understand why I have this feeling, and where would you place yourself in the sort of order and chaos versus, how you prepare your food?
Well, that's a lot of questions. I mean, first of all, first of all, let me sort of draw some various things together. There is a tendency on social media, it's not a new one, and to some degree or whatever, and anytime sort of people in our spaces sort of have content, but there is a tendency to sort of do this kind of content where it's the eternal hot take, and it's always about something. It's basically, let's take something that everyone loves, whether it be I don't know, Roman Roman imperial art, or snack foods, or I don't know, certain flowers in the garden, whatever. Let's take some object or some sort of thing that people like, and let's like either tell them how awful it actually is, or that it's bad for you. I mean, there's a whole kind of nutritional sort of right-wing Twitter that exists as well. I mean, we always joke about this, the anti-seed oil people, but you can find one of those hot takes about everything in the world. Did you know that if you
you have to sort of decide when you stop going down the rabbit holes and be like, no, I'm good with, I'm going to adopt the seed oils. I'm going to stay away from the alien stuff. Right? You sort of have to pick and choose.
Indeed, it's everything. Eventually, it's everything. If you eat porridge oats, you're going to die. You're going to turn into a horse. Right. Or you've got to eat. All you can eat is boil. You can boil a rock with water and drink the water. That's all you can do. Otherwise, you're going to die. Yeah, that is a thing, and I think that kind of thing. I mean, that's sort of the basis of the hot take. You know, basically take something beloved and trash it, so that people get incensed and angry. You know, and then they will engage with you. You know, and that's that is a particularly irksome thing that you know that. But I do think that is hovering the background of all of these other questions that you're bringing up.
I mean, rock water is great. You just add a bit of onion and some salt and pepper.
No,
and,
you can't eat. No, salt is bad,
and then you have a really good stew. All you need is a rock, right?
No, because if your chickens aren't raised, learning a mantra and meditating each morning, then they're poisonous and you can't eat them.
Well, Ludwig Path and I have discussed this quite a few times, and our thoughts on this is pretty much that once you step outside the Overton window, you're sharing the space with, well, everything and anything, right? Like, what's the limit?
Yeah.
Once you're stepping outside of the reservation, stepping off the reservation. Yeah.
People have too much fucking spare time, so they will just invent shit like this, and it will go on for months and years, and it just becomes, as you said, they will start digging new rabbit holes inside the old rabbit hole, and there's just no winning. As you said, if you don't arrange your chicken in a mandala pattern each morning, then they become poisonous and explosive. So, yeah,
exactly.
Got to activate your elements.
Yeah, and you've got to be sunning your balls while you eat the chicken, or else it's bad for you.
Yeah, but you have to do it through a red light filter.
Oh, right,
otherwise
the red light.
Get ball cancer.
But it's got to be the right red light. If it's not the right wavelength, then of course it's going to be dangerous as well.
Of course, yeah.
Oddly enough, that wavelength is the most common wavelength of red LEDs for some reason. It's odd that would be the wavelength, the
cheapest one. Yeah,
that's the cheapest one. And then of course it leads me to the question. I mean, so the origin of this so-called Slopgate was it Soigon of a cat, or was it him? Was it Carl?
I think it was Carl Benjamin who I think he replied to someone who was defending Mexican food or something. No, it was Pascal Emmanuel Gobri. I can bring it up here. This is what started it all. Just a moment. Here we go. He says, a surprising amount of replies talk about Mexican food, which is hilarious. We are so good at putting slop on a tortilla. What do you say about that? Frenchie is posting an L. Nobody outside the US or Mexico cares about Mexican food. Which, I mean, if you want to get into a debate about what Mexican food is, I mean, you're kind of right. You do have the Scandinavian, or at least I know Norwegian and Swedish phenomenon of importing the taco, and that sort of being it was literally sold to us by the Swedes as a replacement for the Friday night family meal, and then sort of turning it into like a build your own taco event instead.
Yeah, and you bought it hook, line, and
we
sinker.
did.
Why were the Swedes?
So did you.
Why were the Swedes? Why were the Swedes involved?
Because the Swedes were the one importing Mexican food.
Yeah,
I had to really dig into this week, because I was like, where did this come from? So I started reading up, and then I had to talk to my grandmother about this, because she was in the area where it first appeared, and I have family members who worked in one of the first Mexican restaurants in Norway, so I could verify pretty much when this happened, and it was not a bottom-up thing, let's put it like that. It was certainly advertised to us.
Yeah, it was one of the large food conglomerates that controlled the market, that wanted to take a slice with something new and exciting. And
to be fair, again, if you show that stuff to a Mexican, he's probably gonna have a fit and say that's not real Mexican food. Obviously,
well, that's a very good point to bring up. One of which I think is crucial to understand. I mean, we're not really talking about Mexican food. What we're talking about is Americanized Mexican food, or Tex-Mex, or California Mexican. I mean, the taco, the enchilada, the burrito. I mean, all of these foods, as sort of popularly understood, most of them are not really Mexican foods. They're kind of variations on aspects of um, food below the equator in North America that has been kind of adapted. I mean, the burrito, for instance, as far as I recall, was an invention of California. And again, these foods, many of them were sort of engineered in a way to be the kind of thing that you could sell to take away. They could be sold from a food truck. They could be sold from a and they're easy to eat. You can eat them with your hands. You don't need you don't need your electroplated nickel silver flatware. You don't need your porcelain plates or whatever. It's the same with a hamburger. It's the same with any of these foods. I mean, they were popularized.
I believe the hamburger was created to sell to factory workers on the lunch break, right? They'd post up their carts outside factories around lunchtime, and then they'd come out and they'd get a burger, right?
Yeah, and then of course you can trace this back. I mean, the origin of the sandwich itself, shrouded in the mist of time, was reported to be
as we witnessed. Sorry.
Well, a British aristocrat called the Earl of Sandwich. I can't remember which Earl of Sandwich it was, who was purported to be either too busy in his office or too busy playing cards or gambling to go to the dining room and eat a proper meal. So again, he had his roast beef put into the bread so that he could just take it quite quickly and easily. So anyway, yes, this sort of convenience food. Now, the origins of all these foods, including the hamburger, go back much farther in various cuisines, but the form we know them in, And so I think that's a very important distinction if you're talking about Mexican food, because Mexican cuisine, just like any cuisine of a large country, a large geographical area, is going to have lots of variation. There's lots of regional Mexican cuisines. I don't know a lot about it. I've been to Mexico and I've eaten some of them. I've been to various places that have that as their kind of various restaurants that use Mexican food as their kind of house style. I mentioned on UO that there's a place in America, in Chicago, called I think it's in Chicago, called Frontera Grill, which was opened, and the head chef was a man called Rick Bayless, and very famously exploring Mexican cuisines, regional cuisines, in a serious way. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the taco.
Yeah, in a way, and that's sort of what I was trying to get at, I suppose, with the Snickers bar thing, is that, and it was something that I've been trying to get my head around a bit more, or sort of, I guess, internalize it, ever since I talked with Alexander Adams about a month ago. And at some point, we were discussing his book, Blood, Soil, and Paint, and at some point I asked him a very difficult question, because in Blood, Soil, and Paint, he talks a lot about how the mid-century Germans would fight in Parliament over what art would or should be accepted and what art shouldn't. And I guess I posed the question to him of, well, how do we know that? How do you create a society that allows for exploration in art without allowing for subversion, I guess? And his idea is basically to return to a mode of thinking where art shouldn't be for everyone, which I would categorize as the capital T tradition, and say that, if we transfer that over here to food, you could say that cuisine traditionally hasn't been for everyone, and there's tiers to dishes, there's tiers to food, but the problem is that everything has sort of been mushed together in this, everything becomes slop, right? Either you're super rich or you eat the slop.
Well, but that's also the fundamental flaw of this whole argument, because why is it slop? Why is the choice either fine food or slop? I mean, my contention is that
okay, how about I put it like
hang on. My contention is that most food, most of what we call the cuisine of a nation, is actually the food of the lower class, is peasant food in its essence.
Mhm. And I would agree. I mean, Leo, you wrote something to me about this week.
Yeah, it was more or less on, because if you look at it through a historical perspective, and you can, as we said earlier, in certain forms of modern foods, you can find them very far back in written sources and even in old art and stuff like that. But it is fundamentally, peasant foods that you see, because historically the upper classes has been, been a bit more experimental. But then it hasn't really been so much about the cuisine as more of a statement of wealth. And I mean, it's a recurring thing. I mean, that is went back through the Egyptians, the Scythians, the Romans, the French court, or the French courts of the Solar King and stuff like that. So, it's you can't really, it operates on a little bit of, it's meant for different things. The one of the
Right.
the foods of
Because
the
in my
large
head-
royal banquet is meant to impress and threaten his enemies.
Mm.
It's not made for, getting a nice meal and, then go and do something productive. It's
Because in my head, there are 3 tiers of food when approaching this sort of conversation. There is what we would traditionally call, and calling it slop is wrong, right? It is what we would call peasant food, which is a lot of food culture. I mean, let's try to use British as an example. You have the the Scousers in Britain, which take their name from the lapskaus, the literal slop food from Denmark, which would be, low tier, in air quotes, food. And I would assume that something like when we went to the pub, Leo, and had the roast lamb, that would be considered a more medium tier food. Would that be correct?
Yeah, well, more or less. I mean,
And then once you get to the culinary arts, and I think calling it that sort of says something about it. There's art in it. It serves almost a higher purpose than just nourishment, right? It's not about necessarily the gathering of a family. It's not about fuel. It's about something more. It's about an expression. It's about, as you said, it's about striking fear into your enemies. Am I totally off course here? I'm just talking.
Well, I
Because my
I don't know.
contention is that sort of
It depends upon when you're talking about as well, because of course these notions have changed and will change, quite quickly depending upon the type, the arrangement of the societies in which they're used. I would say that this use of food, in that, but certainly in the idea of food as sort of art would really just depend upon where you're talking about and which period you're talking about, because a lot of what we sort of consider the normative aspects of cooking and food and presentation and all of that are not terribly old. They go back maybe 400, 500 years. I mean, a lot of the sort of like modern notions of dining and such, and the way that food was served. I mean, that, again, that relatively modern innovations. Not that, of course, in ancient times it didn't work this way as well, but it would have been very different. So I think you are right, but it's conditioned upon when and where.
Fair enough. Yeah. So your approach here is basically to say that, and sort of, well, to use the word again, approaching this topic in with a with ranking in mind is the wrong way of doing it. Is that correct?
It's one way of doing it, but I think that it's also going to depend on the personalities, depending upon. I mean, again, if you're going to sort of talk about like food as a kind of courtly ritual, it's going to depend upon the aristocrats or the nobles or the kings or queens or whatever that you're talking about, because some of them, of course, would have favored very different styles. But it's certainly true that in the more modern eras of history, you know, there was this sense of food as a kind of display of wealth and power, and you know, and the type of foods that were eaten. You know, it was, you know, and of course, depending upon the period, the point would have often not had anything to do with the flavor of the food or its nutritional value. It would have been its rarity. It would have been its method of display. You know, I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, again, I'm most familiar with kind of, you know, Anglo British cuisines and or French or continental things. And so, you know, I'm thinking, of course, you know, in the court of, you know, Henry VIII or Elizabeth I, you know, there would have been a great tradition for kind of these massive pastries, you know, with like so there was a dish called swan pie, which of course the swan in England was the province of the monarch, and so no one else really could eat this dish or have this dish unless by approval. If you were assigned a swan, you could occasionally eat it. And so, you know, it was this elaborate sort of pastry shell with the swan meat inside of it, but, you know, basically with the body of the sort of feathers and the head of the swan arranged on top in a very elaborate way. And I can't imagine that after all of the work it took to make this dish look the way it does, that it was particularly good to eat. It probably would have been cold by the time it came to the table anyway. A lot of the pastry wouldn't have been edible. You know, they would have made a certain kind of hard pastry that was meant only for display. You basically knock the pastry and scoop out what was inside, and it would get past you in a little dish. But the point of it was, of course, its presentation at the table. So, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be sort of different uses of these things. But you know, I think that when most people talk about this, you know, they're not thinking of that sort of thing. They're not thinking of food in that way. They're thinking of food in the way that a kind of, you know, a kind of lower class person would think of it, which is, of course, sustenance and flavor. You know, so yeah, I just think there's so many sort of like threads that people are just tangling all together and throwing at each other, rather than kind of teasing out what could be an interesting discussion about this subject.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm hoping to try to tease out at least a little bit, but I'm not sure if we're getting anywhere. I'm just trying to understand this because I have a bit of a contradiction. I have a sort of instinct in me that sort of tiers food somehow. But I also understand very much what you're saying, Mr. D.
And you also have the thing is also, since a lot of the, you know, more should we say the more esoteric foods that goes around both in Europe and well, I'm sure they exist in the much berated Mexican kitchen as well. And is that a lot of these, like, take for example the most famous Scandinavian one, you know, with fermented herring, you know, you're fermenting it, you know, you eat with sour cream and dough and stuff like that. And you also have some others that are like birch bark, like a porridge that people eat like once a year up here. And these aren't, you know, standard foods by any stretch of the imagination. These are essentially starvation foods. It's what people ate when everything else was gone, and it was, you know, either we eat this or we starve. So they more or less exist in modern times more as a ritual. Rather, you make an event by eating these things, and you eat them at certain holidays or
sheep's head, for example.
Like the sheep's head, for example, in Norway. It's not really something that you know, have every other Sunday.
It's not that much meat either. You get the cheeks and then, you know, the eyes, and that's pretty much everything there is, right?
It reminds me also of like what's it called, hackal or hackarl, I think, something like that. It's the Greenland shark that's prepared in a certain way in Iceland, and it is one of the most horrible things I've ever eaten. But I understood from the people who served it to me that it was sort of, again, it sort of becomes a kind of national symbol, or as you say, a ritual, a kind of ritual that it sort of passes beyond kind of food that you eat to sustain yourself, and it becomes a sort of symbol of what you were as a people. So yeah, there's lots of foods like that. I mean, and then of course, then there are kind of food that make their way into the diet only in one time of the year. You know, you think of the British Christmas pudding, you know, which is quite an elaborate preparation and very expensive, you know, and which, you know, is also sometimes typical of these dishes. You know, there's far too much that goes into them to really be a staple food, but they are sort of remnants of, as you say, either starvation food or kind of, you know, foods that were meant to symbolize a certain seasonal ritual, religious ritual, or they're like harvest foods or whatever, you know. And so yes, there are certainly tiers of foods and kinds of foods that present themselves, you know, at certain occasions, you know, as opposed to, of course, the sort of thing you're going to eat on a, you know, in contemporary times. You know, what are you going to eat at, you know, after a long day's work, you know, on a weeknight.
Right.
And then, of course, there's scarcity. You know, I mean, you know, again, the magical modern world, you know, which of course has
Everything at every
thoroughly engineered, you know, sort of agriculture, where we've sort of figured out how to make it possible to eat fruit all year round, you know, through this
avocados up here in the north. Yeah,
exactly. You know, the innovation of the avocado all over the world, or the banana, or the pineapple, you know, of course, which came into common availability far longer ago than people would imagine. I mean, the banana was really already a kind of fixture of fruit markets in far-flung places in Britain by the beginning of the 20th century. You know, there's a painting of Charles II being presented with a pineapple, and thereafter it became quite fashionable for people who, you know, aristocrats on great estates to grow pineapples in their hothouses and such, and they weren't very good. You know, they were very small and sour. They tend to be quite sour, but again, it was a sort of a status food. But you don't imagine some of these foods kind of coming into the diet as soon as they did. But of course, none of that can top now, as you say, the modern world, where you can even get tacos in Sweden and
right. But even, you know, here, that's quite recent. I have there's a friend of the family who works at a music conservatory he plays the piano. And when he was young, so let's say this was it must have been late 50s or early 60s, very early 60s at least. He won a competition in town, a music competition, for his piano play, and the first place prize was a box of hermeticized pineapple, which of course he had to share with the rest of the family. So we only got like one bite, famously, as he tells it. But that's not that long ago, right? Where that was something rare and exotic. My dad tells me to this day when you know they got available oranges year round, right?
Yes, and some were, you know, and of course they would make their way into different countries at different times. I mean, so because of the various relationships between Spain and Britain.
I'm sure Britain has had access to a lot more.
Yeah, we had several oranges, you know, which are the kind of sour oranges which you preserve and make marmalade and such out of. But those had been around for hundreds of years. But you know, of course, where you are, it's going to be a different story. You know, it's a very different. There's a very different route there, and it's much more difficult. Yeah. Yes, but also then you have as I said, the issue of scarcity. You know, most people certainly prior to the 20th century would not have eaten meat every day. You know, you know, people of kind of peasant class. Yes, or they would have or the meat would have been sort of yeah, it would have been used quite scarcely. I mean, the sort of the staple meat, the most commonly eaten meat of like the British medieval actual peasants would have been pork, because you could keep a pig. Everyone could keep a pig because they're very easy to keep. They don't need a lot of space, and they can eat. They can eat the slop, and then of course, whatever time of year you can butcher the pig and salt it, and the meat can be kept for quite a long time. So that's why again you get so much emphasis on bacon, for instance, in its various forms, because that was the meat that most people ate. That was all they could get. It would be much more kind of a luxury to eat beef, and beef has always been relatively expensive. Now, of course, some of these meats have become outrageously expensive again, and so people are sort of forced back into this mode where they're eating. You either eat the cheap cuts, or you eat you eat cheaper things. You eat fish, you eat fowl, and of course, all of those things would have had their own time of innovation. I mean, famously, I know that the Scandies and Norwegians society. I mean, you eat a lot of oily fish, which I happen to love.
Yes.
I love the mackerel, and I love the I love the herring in all their forms. But this would have been abundant and quite nutritious food. And so that ends up being the kind of basis of your diet. I mean, what is
lamb usually? Yeah.
It can keep, yes, or lamb or sheep. Yeah. Again, another thing that is fairly easy to keep and fairly low on the use of resources. Now I keep thinking,
and what easy to preserve a lot of it if you air dry it.
And a funny thing about the Scandinavian coast, North Sea coastline. I mean, the most common food of fishers, small time. They own perhaps just a small rowing boat or something like that. Since most of the actual fish that they put up went for preservation, or either via pickling or via salting and drying for inland export, not export to other nations, but to it went inland. The most common food actually for on the North Coast was actually various sorts of crabs and lobsters. So it was like, oh fuck no, it's not lobster again. And we had like in the forest industry along the large rivers that come up in the northern parts of Sweden, loggers actually had written into their contracts that they did not have to eat salmon more than 3 times a week.
Right. Yeah, because it's just so abundant. Yeah, the thing about lobsters is true also. I mean, there's again, I'd have to look into the specific veracity of it, but there's the idea that it was, considered cruel and unusual punishment for prisoners to be served lobster every day because it was so abundant, and and lobster was a very cheap food. I mean, now of course it's been fished into oblivion to the point where it's become quite a rare food, and of course you don't even get the size of lobsters that you used to get. You used to get enormous ones, but you can read like the diary of Samuel Pepys, written in the 1660s, and he's going to an inn, and what do they serve? They serve lobsters, they serve eels, these things which have been incredibly cheap at one time, and of course now we consider these certainly lobster to be a kind of rarefied dish, but these perceptions will change over time. You mentioned the potato. The potato is a very interesting case because, of course, we didn't have them. I mean, they're relatively recently cultivated. They're a new world food anyway. So it's odd that a lot of things, it's like the tomato. It's odd to think of Italian cuisine before the tomato, but of course the tomato came from the New World. It's a nightshade plant like tobacco and aubergines and all of the rest, and so those all were again innovations after the 1400s or early 1500s. So and the potato wasn't really cultivated on any massive scale until the 18th century and the early 19th century. In its native state, they're kind of green and they're filled with an alkaloid called solanine, which is mildly toxic. So they really have to be kind of cultivated to make them edible. But once they did that, of course, they formed the a very important basis of the cuisine of many places over the world. The potato was spread far and wide after a certain point because they're again so easy to cultivate. And then when you have a kind of blight, like what happened in Ireland, it became so the lower classes became so dependent on it that once it was not available, people starved. So also forgive me if anything happens because there is a terrible storm happening where I am. So
we might lose you then. Yeah, no problem.
It's possible. I just saw a flash of lightning. So
right. Well, I think that I don't know if we have anything more we want to talk about when it comes to food right now. It helps me understand a bit more.
I would just like to add, since we talked about the pineapple so many times, so just a little side note. It was kind of a fun thing that went down in Britain. I think especially in London, they had during that period before they managed to get transports working in a better way, and large scale cultivation became a thing in England. They actually had, what was it, rent a pineapple franchises where you could rent a pineapple to display and to impress your neighbors.
Nice.
Because the pineapple was they don't keep especially not during the transportation. They did, very few of them survived across Atlantic, the trip back over the Atlantic in any whole state. So essentially they became not for eating, they became for displaying.
Yeah, you would
prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, there are stories also of again sort of great houses they would sort of use them until they were really quite unpleasant looking. They would bring this sort of sort of half dried husk to put onto the display in the center of the table. But I wanted to say one more thing. I mean, again, back to Slopgate. I mean, just the sort of I've struggled with what people were objecting to. Like, why? So, I mean, talking to AA, it seemed that he was objecting to this idea that you would put foods together. Like, literally his objection, or his sort of seemed the basis of the objection to, quote, slop, was that it was like a combination of foods in one bowl or plate, and that just seems odd to me. Is that people's definition of slop? I mean,
kind of weird, because that's just a stew, isn't it? It's
just a stew, or it's just, there's so many dishes which are kind of you're obviously combining ingredients. Why does that make it slop? I mean, eating something in a bowl, is that slop?
Doesn't the man like beef bourguignon? What's his deal?
Well, it's like a child, it's like a finicky child who, if their peas touch their mash, I'm not going to eat it. They're polluted,
Well, there's one thing I thought about, which I don't know was explicitly said during this, but it was a bit of a landmine that Leo stepped on a year ago, which is the idea of sort of spice versus flavor. And
when I was swarmed by the angry Indians.
Yeah, he angered the Pajeets. But some cultures
never do that.
Do have a tendency to overspice their food and sort of ruin, in air quotes, the flavor, in my opinion.
A contentious issue.
Which is a contentious issue. Which, of course, I'm not an Indian guy. That doesn't mean I can't appreciate the taste of masala, right? But I do sort of see that there's, well, as you said, Leo, you got into trouble because you said that the spices were too...
I would say not necessarily, but in certain ways, in certain, not in all of the cuisine, of course, but I think we were discussing more like, Indian street food and stuff like that. And I said something about, well, it's about the freshness of the produce in many cases. So, you use the various spices and chilies and stuff like that to try to not only to mask the flavor, but actually kill off some of the harmful bacteria, because you don't have sanitary conditions. And, well, that set off a firestorm. Eventually,
To a certain
though, was an
extent,
Indian guy who
that's
came in
true,
with
isn't
a
it?
quite sizable following. Yeah, he came in and just said, he's kind of right, and then he pulled up statistics on the tens of thousands of Indians who die from food poisoning every year. So,
well, because if I recall, going to, I'm not sure if that's Mexican even, but ceviche uses limes to almost have a cooking effect. Is that true?
Yeah.
I've heard that.
The acidity. It's in that's done all over the place. It's sort of done in the tropics as well as in the Caribbean. But so the lime juice is acidic enough that it will denature the proteins in. It's usually done to fish. Can be done to other things, and of course that is kind of what happens when you cook meat as well. You are causing you are denaturing proteins and causing other things, but it's not going to cook it in that if it's got pathogens in it, it's probably not going to get rid of those as efficiently as heating it would be. But yes, I mean it is sort of quote cooking of things, and now of course you can do it fairly safely, but you would be taking quite a risk in the past. But eating was always. I mean, before refrigeration, eating it's always going to be a gamble. I mean, if you want to get into it, I mean, drinking the water in London prior to the Victorian sewerage system was just as bad as just as bad as eating in India. It's about as bad as drinking out of the Ganges. The Thames was absolutely fucking filthy. So, I mean, the other thing about this Slopgate is I hate these kind of Britain versus America sort of.
Well, here we go, because that was
discourses.
The follow-up topic to this, is that the underlying current here is the American question, right? The America versus Europe divide. Consumer in the chat here says that British food Twitter was an organized campaign consistently on message. American food Twitter was a disorganized mass caught off guard and thus coping. Well, I mean, that's some elite theory for tonight. But I mean, it is a real problem in our communication, and I've been caught off guard, and I'll admit it. I've done my share of triggering the Americans, but there is a difficulty in communication because it feels like we're talking past each other when we should be helping each other out, which seems to be your message, Mr. D.
Yeah, but I'm not interested in that type of conversation. I know that it's that certainly. Well, Carl Benjamin does it all the time. He has this sort of like, very, very kind of, middle class sort of British, sort of patriotism, expressed in this sort of like weird necessity to exert every sort of regional, every sort of English regional, truth as being a proof of superiority, and I don't have any sort of. I think a lot of that is sort of fueled by some sense of insecurity about things, and I don't. It's never interested me. I don't care about that kind of haughty, you weird Americans, I don't know. But maybe it's because I'm a rootless cosmopolitan at heart. I don't know. But I like to enjoy things. I mean, if I go to Norway, I want to enjoy, things there, and I'm not going to, just or if I go to France, or if I go wherever, I'm going to take it as an opportunity to sort of experience the, other things. So I'm not so quick to sort of mog on other people like that.
Well, I will say I do find a lot of your takes, if we could call it that, to be quite sensible. If we're allowed to use that word, I'm not sure if you would consider yourself that, but compared to a lot of other people on Twitter, a lot of your stuff is very reasonable. It's very measured, if that's a word I could use.
Yeah, it may also because I'm old.
Maybe you're not based enough. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm not based enough. Although weirdly enough, I never went through the trajectory that many people have gone through, which is that we hear the story of most so many people in again our quote spheres started out as default liberals and then became reactionaries or whatever over time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been a kind of reactionary, and I'm not saying that I'm not that I don't have a kind of the snobbishness of my particular class, because of course that's unavoidable. But at a certain point, I just I don't know. I just don't have time for these sorts of
that
things.
gives you a bit of a leg up in trying to reach, if we can call it, real tradition in that sense, instead of just we talked about that in the beginning, just sort of grasping at straws. So seed oils is the new devil for me. I'm going to go down that rabbit hole for 6 months, right?
Yeah. Now, I will say, of course, the seed oil thing is that I actually don't. Well, I mean, so if I'm going to use,
well, it was just an example.
But I just should say though that even though I joke all the time about the anti-seed oil people, I mean, I certainly don't use rapeseed oil. I don't use soya oil at all. There's no reason to use them when there's so many better tasting fats. So it's fine. I don't even want to. I want to be even conciliatory to the seed oil bros.
The seed oil enjoyers, yeah.
Because
I don't use any either, but that's a whole different thing that viewers of the channel know. So
yeah, indeed. I also will not consume high fructose corn syrup, so beloved of not so beloved of Americans, but so beloved of their horrible food industry. But anyway, that's beside the point. But
I do not enjoy it. We don't get a lot of corn syrup here, but the few things we get, and that's my sort of big stand food take, is that I really hate hot sauce sort of connoisseur guys who get really into hot sauces, which is just sort of various different formulations of corn syrup and capsaicin mixes, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
I should be
the sort of people that will.
Are you a hot sauce connoisseur, Mr. D?
How hard they can hit themselves in the face with a mallet. It's the same fucking thing.
Do you have rows of hot sauces, Mr. D? Do you bring
no,
them to
I don't do that. I don't do that, but I do love chilies, and I grow my own chilies and
I too
make
love
my own sauces.
Chilies and various spices. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that the sort of the hot sauce phenomena is basically processed slop. It's processed just syrup that you put on your food.
Yeah, no, I don't collect commercial. As I say, I grow my own chilies and make my own. But yeah,
that's fair enough, yeah.
Leo has a good point that there is an aspect of that. It's just like, can I give myself excruciatingly painful diarrhea for 5 days by eating Arse Blaster 2000?
Yeah.
That's a bit silly.
Dr. But Chili's Arse Blaster 5000 now with the Carolina Reaper seeds, etc. Yeah.
Interesting scatological effects like little children. Well, then you can just invest in some black truffles and eat the entire thing in one go and see what happens.
Truffles. See, that's me. I mean, I just like food so much. So everything that you mention, I mean, I'll even eat Monster Munch occasionally. You don't get Monster Munch, but it's a horrible
Monster Munch.
It's a horrible corn-based snack that's given to children in the UK.
Apparently I can get it here in Norway.
Oh.
Like a specific store. Yeah.
Treat yourself.
I'm gonna treat. You know what? I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy Monster. I have to drive for a bit, I think. But if I'm in the area, I'm gonna get myself a Monster Munch, and then I'm gonna report back to you.
Let me know how it goes. Well, and then of course I'm quite naive when it comes to like a lot of because I don't like I don't like or eat processed food, and I never have. I mean, partially because again, as someone who's cooked for a very long time, I tend to like to cook my own food or eat good pure food from good sources. So a lot of processed food I've never had. I never had a Dorito until a few years ago when someone jokingly gave me some with Mountain Dew, because that was the sort of archetype of the gamer.
I don't know how they taste in outside of Norway, because we have like weird food laws, so they have to change stuff. But even here, those like cheese powder covered tortillas, it's absolute death.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's never tasted good, and some people eat a lot of them, and I don't get it. I don't like cheese doodles either, by the way, Leo. So
no, it's
What is
really
that?
not my thing. I've tried those
that's
at a party sometime. You know, the what do you call them? The cheese powdered nachos, and it just tastes like
Yeah.
doesn't taste like cheese, and I don't know what it is. I mean, it's just awful.
this is the cheese doodle, and the smell.
Oh
of these
yes,
things,
oh yes. What's it?
It smells eggs. Yeah, it smells like eggs when you open it.
Yeah,
Disgusting.
So I like. So what are those things? Cheetos. So occasionally I will eat Cheetos just because I again you gotta. Sometimes you have a craving for rubbish. Although my Oliver Perrin, Semigog, makes fun of me because once I was talking about when on the very rare occasion where I will eat Cheetos, things like that, I do it with chopsticks because I don't like to get that orange dye on my fingers.
You know what? I was gonna say when I talked about the Seinfeld episode, I have been like my friends all my life have been ganging up on me because I don't like getting when I eat something, I hate getting my fingers sticky.
Yes.
So whenever I eat something like that, whenever I eat nuts, just even nuts, if I'm going to eat nuts by myself, I'll grab like a teaspoon and I'll eat the nuts with a teaspoon from like a small bowl. And they always like told me I'm a freaking weirdo for it. So it's good to know there's someone else out there.
No, I eat them with chopsticks, or even worse is that I because I work as a painter and an artist, so I've got a large supply of rubber gloves, nitrile gloves, and so I'll even put on a pair of rubber gloves and eat them. Well, this is a good thing, of course, because I remember going to a not Eritrean but Ethiopian restaurant, and it's very much as you described about the Eritrean. It's all sort of these pastes, it's all these sort of purees and such, and you get this sort of spongy roll of bread, and you tear off a piece of bread, and everything is eaten with your hands. You dip your hands in with this bread and scoop things up. It's a total nightmare for me.
Same. I absolutely agree.
You're gonna have a horrible time if I ever invite you for a whole suckling pig roast, then Walrus, because then
if I eat like a spare rib, I can get over it because I can eat the pig in like one. I can do the one sitting, and then I have to go wash my hands.
Yeah.
But the thing is, eating things with like dusting on it or any sort of thing that's been coated, a snack that has like salt on it, my fingers get like coated in it, and I really don't like that feeling.
No, I'll happily tear into a side of beef with my hands.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, just have to wash my hands afterwards.
Yeah, or if you're at the right great establishment, they'll bring you a finger bowl with rose petals in it,
and
or a hot towel. I like this
even better.
The Japanese like steaming hot towel at the beginning and end of the meal. That's good.
Yeah, that's not something that you see very often. The only place I get a hot towel these days is at the barber. Which is very nice. I mean, that's worth just being allowed to lie there with the hot towel on your face and basically fall asleep for 10 minutes is it's worth the price of the shave.
Indeed. I mean, I gave up shaving years ago, so.
Glow in the Dark says Walrus. No, I'm not germophobic. I just don't like getting my. It's just it triggers my disgust sensor. Okay, so it's when I become the dictator, I'm gonna mandate teaspoon eating of all nuts. So that's going to be my.
Look at this Northern Knot. I love licking the salt residue. So, the
fingers.
Do you have KFC in your country? It's
no,
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Actually, I had a moment because I've tasted KFC one time, and that was in Oxford in like let's say maybe 10 years ago. I tried it there. Wasn't very good. Didn't really taste like much. And then we came back for the event, and we went to Oxford on one of the days before, and so we walked past that exact same store. I remember, that's why I remember it. Sorry, that was a random aside. What did you want to say about KFC?
Well, I was going to say that their slogan, I don't know if they still use it, was, as someone's put it, yeah, glow in the dark, let's put it, finger licking good. So their advertising slogan was finger, not licking, finger licking good. And that, I always found that so revolting. Just the idea that you would lick food off your fingers. I mean, I understand if you're making a cake and you taste, dip a finger in to taste the batter, but licking your fingers after eating chicken, no. Oh.
Very rude.
Yeah, very rude. You're meant to wipe your greasy fingers on the tablecloth. That's what it's there for. I'm not making that up. That's what the tablecloth. No. That's what the tablecloth used to be for.
Yeah. I mean, before we had the bread plate.
Speaking of bread plate, that's another thing I always like to mention. Is of course in the Renaissance and in the medieval period to some degree, it was the custom for nobles to eat their meals on a giant round of dense bread called a trencher.
That's the bread plate.
Yeah, and the trencher, and then of course afterwards the trenchers would be collected and distributed to the poor. So they would eat the bread that had soaked up all the juice from.
And that's the real question for you, elite theorists and capital T traditionists out in the audience here. Would you be willing to live in a society where you get the trench scratch? Because that's what we're talking about ultimately. Yeah. I mean, if you want hierarchy, that's hierarchy.
Yeah. If you want slop,
and you're not a real, you have to internalize it to the point when you're being killed by the king's men, like they're stamping on your face and your face is in the mud, and they're going to kill you because the king is evil. You're still going to say, well, at least it's better than democracy. That's how it is when you internalize it.
Oof.
Yeah, but the problem with the traditional minded right or something is that I all think that they all, it's kind of weird. None of them are peasants. Everyone is warrior or priest class or part of, or for the one who are taking a little bit of a stretch, part of the lower nobility or something like that. They can settle for being a duke or perhaps a count or something like that. Yeah, it'll be fine, but not peasantry, and absolutely not unlanded peasantry, serfs. No, that's not going to be them.
It's like the communists when they say they're just going to sit around and write poetry all day.
Yeah, what's the Ash Sakar thing? Luxury. What is it?
Luxury communism or something?
Yeah, it's that.
Fully automated space luxury communism. Yeah,
fully automated. That's it. Yeah.
Exactly. So he says, sounds like a king who has not embodied the monarchical spirit. That's right. But I mean, what do? Are you willing to accept the moment when the king hasn't? Because that's part of the system. That's my point. And if you are, I mean, great. You're ready, I think. Let's see here. Let me check my notes. Oh, yeah.
What else was on the list?
Well, I got asked a question by a viewer or listener to ask you about contemporary art. Now, of course, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people rail against contemporary art, but the question was, can you recommend or show us or tell us, I mean, about some of your favorite contemporary artists? Fan de Villiers is not allowed, by the way.
Yeah, so it's difficult. I mean, depending on what people mean. I mean, if they mean contemporary art, like literally art being made now, like the art of today.
I think that's what he meant when he asked the questions. Like, is there any, contemporary, as in living artist that you enjoy?
Oh, obviously, and of course I mean, so I have worked professionally as a fine artist for for now. Quite a few years, 20 years, basically. And yes, obviously. I mean, the thing, of course, is that I think I may have discussed this on another occasion, but as a sort of practicing artist, I mean, it's the same thing. I think for writers as well, or poets, is that you've got to be careful about, especially sort of consuming work that's being done by your peers or your colleagues, or the work that's within the current zeitgeist, because it's very easy to get sort of polluted by ideas that,
right. Mm-hmm.
That you know what I mean. I'm very susceptible to that. I mean, of course, I think many people are. I mean, as I say, I like to delight in all of God's creation, and so of course I like looking at art. I like eating food. I like looking at flowers and climbing trees and all that, and all of that is going to be, in one sense or another, or could be an inspiration, or sort of start me on a
but you don't want to muddle that with someone else's perception,
with someone else's work. And so I tend to be very sort of, I tend to sequester things very thoroughly. I also have to be careful because, of course, I maintain anonymity. I maintain a sequestration between my online, and my own sort of professional work. But yes, I mean, obviously. So, I mean, for instance, you can, I post art on Twitter, just basically as well, it was meant to be a kind of starting off point in a conversation. As I say, I don't always post things that I like. I post things that I think, sort of present interesting ideas. That didn't work. For some reason, art makes people very angry. I don't know. And of course, I agree with what you said about Alexander Adams, is that art isn't for everyone. At least not, there's just, we have been so poisoned by these egalitarian ideas that everything should be comprehensible, that everyone should be able to become a connoisseur, everyone should have an opinion about things. Well, no, I mean, there are many things about which I cannot even, I don't comment, I don't opine, because I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, there's a certain need for almost an education to be able to appreciate the art.
And that's how it's always been. Yeah, and that is how art has always been. I mean, it really wasn't until the 19th century that you had this idea that all art had to sort of succumb to to the tastes of the taste of the quote public. Yeah,
it's almost baked into sort of the more patronage systems as well. I mean, of course, it's a closer relationship between the institution or the persons who are the patrons and the artist than what we have today.
Yeah, and that's why it all went to shit, when you let the riffraff in. I'm sorry.
Or when the government became the sole patron for artists, right? Not sole, but started to monopolize art, essentially, at least in the socialist states of Scandinavia, Leo.
Oh yeah. Tell me about it. Since I'm in the in engineering side for infrastructure and on and then involved in various hospital and public works. Since they actually have state mandated that I think it is 2% of each project budget for something like that for public buildings or renovation project or remodeling of already public spaces should go to art. And it's the most shit art you can see because, of course, the local municipality boards have they curate a list, and the only ones who are on that list are their old boomer friends that went to shit art colleges and stuff, and they aren't commercially viable. They just do things for the municipalities and regions, and it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, there's the I can't show it. No, I can't talk about it. It's gonna dox me. But no, it would be a funny story, but I can't talk about it. Sorry. Well, it was a legendary bad piece of art. Steve Woodmansey says church art has always been available to the masses, though. Yes, but we're not talking about viewing. We're talking about sort of interpreting the art or understanding the art was always up to the priest, right? I mean, the art was available,
Well,
but nobody expected some random guy who walked into the church to be able to comment on what the art means.
Well, that art had a different function as well. It was not. Again, we have this modern notion that art is purely this sort of object to be aestheticized, and of course that wasn't the sole purpose of religious art. In fact, of course, if you're talking about a Roman Catholic Church or other sorts of religions, the art was a venerable object itself. It became a sort of locus of devotion, an altarpiece. Go to a museum and you're strolling through and look at that, Duccio di Bonasegna altar, small altarpiece. Well, that wasn't how it was meant to be experienced. It was meant to be an object of devotion. And of course, much of the,
right.
A lot of the church art wouldn't have even been. You wouldn't have even seen it, if it was, of course, near the high altar, there would have been a screen that prevented you from ever going anywhere near it. You wouldn't have entered the Sistine Chapel because that was a small private chapel.
My favorite thing to do whenever visiting any church is to walk around the outside and look at the it's not gargoyles, that's not the right word, because they're not actually gargoyles. It's these very small figurines or faces that often decorate.
Grotesques.
The grotesques, yes, thank you, Leo.
Yep.
Because there's so much intricate detail and nuance and storytelling in those, and they're sort of hidden away in a sense.
Yes, and you can find the equivalent of that. Of course, you can look at sort of books, scribal books, so-called illuminated manuscripts, and and some of these would have been decorative books of hours and such, but that also in just fairly sort of more kind of quote workmanlike religious books, psalters and things, you'll find this marginalia. There's this whole story going on the edges of the pages, decorated by the so-called illuminators, and there's this whole alternate thing going on. There's like rabbits going into war, and there's old monks like with their carrying their drooping stomachs in a wheelbarrow in front of them. And there's all this kind of comedy and tragedy, and there's monkeys, blowing trumpets onto people's asses, and really weird stuff. But this idea of these kind of intricate alternate stories going on, I think very similar to those grotesques that you talk about. And of course, those things would have been more. That's the kind of thing that that's more like sort of art for the masses, not the illuminated manuscripts. Certainly these sort of features on the exterior of a church, but the art on the inside is a different story. So I would contend that was not art for the masses either.
Right. No, that would be more for the. I mean, it's the time and the place of the religious ceremony and the devotion and the setting of the church, right?
It
would be very strange to take a painting that had been made for a church and put it in an art gallery, right?
Well, that's what we do now. Art museums are kind of just repositories of plunder,
Right.
So. Yeah, I mean, speaking of America versus Europe, you will often, many of the sort of great public institutions in America, museums, would have been founded in the fairly late in the 19th century, and you will notice, of course, that many of those that were founded in the late parts of the 19th century are absolutely filled with sort of basically the treasures of Europe. And the reason, of course, is that all of the kind of American business magnates and tycoons went over to Europe and basically took advantage of sort of the various terrible economic conditions and disasters, and the Europeans would just sell them anything, take it away. We don't care. So this idea of kind of caring for heritage, we have this sense, of course, going to Greece and sort of, or going to, wherever, and bringing all these things back to Britain, as sort of the spoils of colonization. Well, the same thing happened with, weirdly, with the Americans going to Europe and carting away half of the European art, traditional European art, because people were starving and they needed money. So
ends up at the heart of the empire one way or another.
Yeah. Quite curious histories. Eventually, there will be. I mean, eventually, Carl Benjamin will be leading the call for American, for the National Gallery to repatriate the
the stolen art.
The stolen art.
Yeah, well, eventually the serpent comes full round, and
eats itself.
It's gonna eat its way down the tail, and eventually it will come full circle. So
there's a question here from. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Steve. I just noticed Steve Woodman's. Yeah, yes. That is a painting called Ginevra da Vinci. It's at the U.S. National Gallery. It's the only Leonardo picture, fully realized picture in the U.S.
Interesting. Mighty Sebastian for $5 US asks, that's a very funny pay on the profile picture. Says, have you ever had Peruvian food, Mr. D?
Not that I know. I mean, no, not that I'm aware of. I mean, perhaps I've had it at some point, but I can't remember. Particularly going to, no.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
unless I've roasted Paddington Bear on a spit, I don't think I've eaten. I think he was meant to be from Peru, Paddington Bear.
American says, I apologize to Mr. D for my apology.
Hello?
Something happened to.
Hello?
Hello? We're back. Hello.
Did I lose you?
Nope. We're good. It was me. Something went wrong.
Oh, okay.
Melon for $2 US says, I apologize to Mr. D for my appalling art take. Not sure what he's referencing here.
No, I don't know. Have I blocked
Melon,
you?
write in the chat. I'm not sure what this is about.
Have I blocked you, Melon? I don't know. I block anyone that says anything about that art that I think is stupid. So,
oh well. Well, I think that unless Melon is going to follow up on that, I have exhausted all of my points. Leo, do you have anything you would like to bring up here before we get out of here?
No, but we'll see if D blocks me again then.
Well, I was thinking about that. I did have you blocked. Did you say something about art?
I probably did, but I think I've been blocked by you for like 2 years or something like that. I don't know.
Well, you're not anymore. I unblocked you the other day for some reason. So anyway, sorry about that. Nothing personal. But I say I have a very twitchy trigger finger when it comes to blocking people. So I also block all women. All known women are blocked. So.
Well, as far as I know, I'm not a woman, so I'll be safe on that then. But we'll see.
You don't sound like one, although these days you can't assume those things, or you'll get arrested.
That's fair. Yeah. To be fair, I don't
Especially
really follow a
Britain.
lot of women either, but I follow Marcus. What's his name? Furious Pertinax, which is pretty much the same as following all of the online women on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. He and Time Stealer will, there will come, days when they don't have anything to do and they will just retweet e-girls. Both.
So many e-girls.
So how many are there? And somehow, always, if you go in and view something like that say Time Stealer,
like some trad take, and then it's like buy my nudes, right?
Yeah, and then you go in and just like, I'm just gonna click on their profile, and you see follow by Furious.
Followed by Furious.
And,
really? Why is this always in my timeline? And it's like, okay.
It's always them.
Yeah, every woman in the world. I don't know how he does it, but he follows every woman on social media. God bless him.
Yes, we need young virile men to to lead the movement. So Melon says, I was the dumb CIA art guy.
Oh well, there are more than one. Yeah, I get that CIA take all the time. That modern art was invented by the CIA, which is not true at all. The CIA did. I mean, I think we talked about this a bit on UO yesterday, but the CIA did promote certain strains of American art. Well, the funding was more in the sense of basically facilitating its uptake into various American public collections, because of course, that the US has all these kind of state museums in Washington. So but and it was a sort of way in the Cold War of sort of trying to promulgate this American exceptionalism, or this sort of this heroic vision of America, and to counter again strains, especially sort of Marxist sort of strains of art that were coming out of Europe in various ways. So yeah, but they didn't create it as a psyop. They were using art that was already being made as propaganda, and that's a very different thing. And that's something that's done all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say it's you can use Occam's razor on a lot of that stuff, because it's easier to use something that already exists rather than invent it yourself, right?
Yeah, indeed, and of course it can be done negatively as well. You could, as the Nazis did, they would basically made an entire Kunst, this exhibition of art that was meant to show you what bad art was. Now, of course, ironically, they didn't destroy that art. I mean, they were not stupid. They knew how valuable it was, and so after the war, you certainly found that people like various of the very high ups in the party had giant hoards of modern art and such, because again they knew they knew what it was worth, and some of them even liked it themselves, but again, they were using it as propaganda, just in the negative sense, and that goes I mean, Leonardo, for instance, worked for the Medicis, and certainly he was even designing war machinery for them. So
yeah, well, Leonardo wouldn't really, it's always the thing with the patron system. I mean, he wasn't stupid enough to create art or say things about the Medicis that put him in a negative light. I mean, very few people that were stupid enough to do that.
Yeah, you certainly didn't want to do that, and especially back then, because no compunction about getting rid of some miserable artist. And of course, Leonardo was so revered that of course Francis I of France basically took him in at the end of his life and installed him in a castle. And gave him a luxurious cynosure, and of course is
Picasso
where he died.
About.
No, Leonardo da Vinci.
Sorry, I cut out for a moment.
Okay, yeah. No, I was just saying that he was again so heavily revered and so powerful a kind of tool, a sort of symbol and tool and prize, that Francis I of France, the King of France at the time, basically gave him a castle and put him up at the end of his life. He died in France. So yeah.
And it also shows a little bit of how effective that propaganda was. I mean, if you look at the average pleb running around, say the West in general, they will kind of think that Leonardo da Vinci in himself created the technological revolution of the medieval era all by himself, which is kind of a bone I have to pick with the image of da Vinci, but because it just wasn't true.
No, not really. Although, I mean, he theoretically, there are quite a number of sort of concepts that he seems to have innovated. No one would have known about them, or they would have been really certainly obscure until much later on. I mean, because most of those things occurred in his private notes, which no one ever saw, and of course, which the majority of were destroyed. We don't, we there's a lot of Leonardo's quote notebooks that exist, but that's just a small portion of the ones he created. So no, you're right. But again, people like, we like heroes. We like the heroic. We like the unitary, solitary hero. And so I think that's what feeds these sort of myth making. One thing I do remember that Leonardo did.
The problem is that the medieval guild system, or even the pre-medieval guild system, all the technology were essentially hoarded by the various guilds. The masons, the blacksmiths, the mechanical artisans that made all the lifts and pulleys and levers that the others used. So it wasn't really common knowledge. It was floating around there, but nobody outside the guilds actually knew how to make it.
Yeah, it's almost like a weird version of the modern system of patents, that sort of protects sort of innovation. But to be fair, and as I said, Leonardo, there were extraordinary things, like basically the first sort of concept of what we now call like mechanical chain or bicycle chain appears in one of his notebooks, although it couldn't have been manufactured. In fact, it was not manufactured until the 19th century, because there was just no way to do it without a whole bunch of, sort of technologies that would be able to produce it. The same with the helicopter. By the way, his helicopter would not have worked at all. His glider, his sort of glider, his glider didn't really work either. Although with a small modification, someone basically built it and flew it.
Daedalus made a glider too, so
look how that turned out.
The early gliders were that they don't have lateral stability. They don't have a stabilizer fin, because they looked at the birds and then went like, well, we don't need a vertical stabilizer. We just can have the tail thing here. Little knowing that the bird's tail actually can rotate 90 degrees to actually become, and they fly in a little bit of a different way, and it's very difficult to replicate that.
You wouldn't have even been able to kind of observe that without. Anyway, getting off on a tangent.
Well, we love tangents.
4-hour stream. No.
No, I don't have the energy to do that now.
No, I don't.
That's the old Longhouse. The old Longhouse. We had a couple of 3.5-4 hour streams, but those, they tend to, after like hour 2, things tend to devolve.
Well, it's like my Twitter Spaces. Yeah, basically after when it hits 2 o'clock in the morning,
when you bring out the soundboard,
when I start playing memes over my speakers, it's all over.
Let's see here. I do wonder how many of these figures know of machines that will come in the future but can't build them for like 200 years, so they know they'll be dead. Well, I'm not quite sure what he's saying. These Twitter Spaces are as long as Wagner's opera, says Nathan C.J. Hood.
Yeah. I was going to make a dig at Wagner, but I won't.
Well, I think that's enough for today.
He
thank you.
Me. I was going into a tangent.
What were you going to say? Okay, I'll give you a minute. What is it?
No, what was his name there? Melon, about the ancient, these figures and machines that will come in the future. Well, it's kind of an interesting topic, really, because you have like a mini topic, because you have these people tend to think that technology is a very linear progression thing. Line go up, but in reality, you forget. Quite a specialized
classic example of the Chinese
general technologies, just disappears out of the record. It was like the Chinese invented and uninvented the wheel like 2 or 3 times.
One day we'll reclaim the Damascus steel. Yeah,
it's crushed diamonds and all of that, and it's really magical. It's not really, but just take the current military technology glut now that you have in the United States. The army wants more Stinger missiles and man pads of certain types, and because they have given them all to the Ukrainians, and they have depleted themselves completely, and and the military industrial complex just said, yeah, we can't produce those anymore. So we have scrapped the tools, and the guys who know how to make new ones, well, they're either dead or deep into retirement. We're just gonna have to come up with something else. It's just not gonna work.
That's kind of wild.
Yeah, and actually not. It happens quite often in the historical record that you have these pulses of you have widespread technological use, and then things happens that makes it just goes away, and then it comes back again in a different shape. So
yeah, it's a wild world. Anything can happen, I guess. That's crazy. Did you watch the game last night? All right. On that note, it's time to get out of here. I'm getting tired. I'm tired of coughing. So thank you so much, Mr. D, for joining us this week. Real quick before we go, where can people find more of your stuff?
Well, you can follow me on the Bird app at IOHNDEE, John D. Or you can listen to me on that program on the Carpet Merchants channel, Unpopular Opinions. You can also
multiple
visit
programs, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Occasionally I'm on other programs, but yeah, I'm around. I don't know why anyone would want more, but it's there if you want it. So. And thank you, of course, for having me on. It's wonderful to be invited.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, we're really glad to have you, and I mean, I'll try to make it to the spaces. It's been a change in my schedule lately, so it's been hard to catch the spaces when they're at like 6-7 a.m. for me. So
yeah,
always wonderful when I do catch them.
Fair enough. Not always, but right.
No, they're always wonderful in their own crazy way. Yeah.
Okay.
D Radio 24/7, says Ashen Duke.
God's sake.
And thank you as well, Leo, for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Always.
It's always fun to be on, and well,
I don't know
I guess
when
you can find me at Twitter as
next
well.
time.
It's just mostly the odd meme, but mostly just nature posting. Because when I'm out at the cabin or something else, and
well, I mean, if you enjoy nature and axes, then you should follow Leo. That's
I got a collection of very excellent axes.
It's very good. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you all next week. I haven't confirmed what it is yet, so I can't tell you right now. Until then, have a good weekend and a good evening. Bye-bye.